today on Giving Tuesday. We're here at Southern Dharma, and I'm here with Donald Rothberg. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good to be here.
It's good to have you. Donald has been teaching and practicing meditation for over 35 years.
Yeah.
And
getting up to 40.
Getting up to 40.
Yeah.
And in your teachings, I know you emphasize engaged spiritual life and engaged Buddhism. You also have a book titled The Engaged Spiritual Life.
Yeah.
And Donald is also a teacher on Spirit Rock's Teachers Council.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, and really I have a pretty wide range of interests. So I have had a long-term interest in connecting our practice to social service and social action, but also very deeply interested in traditional practices, and also very much in how we bring our practices into the contemporary West. So a lot of interest in the connection of psychology and meditation, skillful speech, working with conflict, and so forth. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
And so I think today, speaking of skillful speech and bringing the practices into life, with people at home and practicing around the holiday times, so wondering if we could do a practice on reactivity, and if you could talk with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so what we'll do is I'll give a very, very brief introduction, and we'll do a very brief practice. Okay. So some of you may know that a key word for the Buddha, the historical Buddha, was dukkha. And he at one point said, I teach only one thing, dukkha and the cessation of dukkha. And dukkha is usually translated as suffering, which I think can be a little misleading, because I think a more appropriate translation is really reactivity, which is both the grabbing hold of experience compulsively, semi-automatically, somewhat unconsciously. And it's also the pushing away. I don't want this. I don't like this. And a version of that's usually what we call suffering. I don't like this physical manifestation and so forth. And so right at the core of the teaching and the practices, right at the core of the teaching called the Four Noble Truths, is the teaching about how to be skillful in transforming reactivity. And so, broadly speaking, there are a few ways to do that if I want to really condense things. The first is to have the perspective and have the intention to notice reactivity. We notice reactivity when someone says something that we think is mean to us, and I react back with a mean statement. Or I don't like something and I immediately react. Or something doesn't go well, I react by blaming myself or blaming someone else. We do this internally, we do it externally, we do it physically, we do it emotionally, we do it mentally. And right at the core of the practice is how to work with that and transform it so that we gradually lessen reactivity. So one way to look at it is that there are a few guidelines. We first of all have the view that reactivity is a problem, that this can be connected with suffering, it can be connected with conflict, with disharmony, and so forth. And you'll find reactivity with most ongoing conflicts, whether interpersonal or between groups or between nations. You'll find a lot of reactivity. And so first we have the view that reactivity is an issue and that we can actually transform it. And that's connected with the intention. Then a really key aspect of reactivity is knowing the degree of intensity of it, because there's a workable range for reactivity. Sometimes things are too much, and if they're too much, it's really good to know that. And then we take a break, we do something which helps us come to balance, we talk with a friend, there are internal practices we can do, and so forth. So when things are overly intense, we can't really be mindful, use our tools, then we would do something else. We would come back to balance by external and internal means. And then but if it's in the workable range, we have a few options. Mindfulness is a really crucial option. Essentially, we notice our reactivity and study it. And we have to become students of our patterns of reactivity. So we notice what I do when I get triggered for some reason. Like for me, when I was studying this a lot, I noticed I was triggered when I thought people didn't listen to me. Very common. I don't feel listened to, I don't feel seen, understood, I don't like it. Can trigger something pretty old, right? And so I would be reactive. And so we get to study it. We can do this in mindfulness, on the cushion, in our formal sittings when something comes up. We can also do it on the spot if we can remember. And so we're mindful and again, this is in the workable range. I'm mindful of what's it feel like in the body when I'm reactive. Again, two forms of reactivity, grasping and pushing away. What's it feel like in the body? What's going on? What's going on when there is anger or irritability? And really study it. Some of it can be unpleasant. We study it. What's it feel like when I'm totally full at a meal and I really want a third piece of cake? You can tell your friends at the dining table, excuse me, I need to do a little bit of mindfulness and check it out. Okay? We can be mindful of what's going on. Again, we often say mindfulness isn't so hard, remembering to be mindful very hard. Okay.
Yes.
And so we can do that. We can also notice what the emotions are, be mindful of the emotions, feel them, notice how they change. And we can also be mindful of the thoughts or narratives. If I'm blaming myself, we can notice what the storyline is that I'm giving. I'm this or that, blame someone else, that person's this or that, and so forth. A very helpful thing to do if there's a lot of reactivity is to bring in some heart practice, loving kindness or compassion, self-compassion sometimes, and it can be done very easily by just saying to oneself, this is hard, isn't it? Yes, this is hard. And recognize that this happens to many people. It's part of the human condition. And then see if we can wish well for ourselves in some way. Just a very simple practice like that, which I got from the teacher Kristen Neff, is very, very helpful. And so that's very useful. And and so those are really 4 core practices, and we could say a lot more when we would get into the realm of speech and interaction, but as an internal practice, that's a good start. And so here's a short practice to work with that. Just bring to mind a time when you were reactive, maybe in the last day or two, and have it be on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of intensity, maybe in the 4 to maybe 6 or 7 range. Not 9s or 10s. And bring to mind the situation. Maybe it was an interaction, maybe something didn't go well and you were getting down on yourself. Bring it to mind as if you were reliving it right now. Imagine the situation, location, who's involved, where you were. And as you start to feel that reactivity, bring in the mindfulness. What's it feel like in the body? Take some time there. What's going on? What emotions are there? And feel those. I'm giving it in a brief version. You might even take more time than I'm taking right now. What are the thoughts going on? And can I hold this with care for myself, for others? and compassion, that this is part of being human. Reactivity, particularly of the kind when we're pushing away something, can feel quite painful. Sometimes the reactivity by which we're grasped actually can feel pleasant. So that's more subtle. You have to do a little more work there. But this is part of the human condition. Sometimes it's quite hard. And we just wish ourselves and others to be as wise, as skillful with reactivity as possible. It's a good way to end a very brief meditation. This is what we could sometimes do on the spot if it happens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, I'm new here to Southern Dharma. I've
Yeah.
only been here a few months, but I know you're one of our teachers who's been coming for a really long time.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you could speak at all to your experience or your time of Southern Dharma as it's changed over the years.
Yeah. Well, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area now, but I grew up in Maryland, and at the time when, not long after Southern Dharma was founded, I believe 1978, and I was living in Kentucky, in Lexington, Kentucky, and I lived there 4 years. And I was a young teacher. I was actually teaching at the University of Kentucky and teaching sometimes courses on Buddhism. I had a meditation group there. Mm-hmm. And I started coming down. I heard about Southern Dharma and started coming down to retreats, particularly the New Year's retreat, which was with John Orr, and I think still is with John Orr. It still is? Yeah. I would start coming down to the New Year's retreat, which I did quite a number of times. Mm-hmm. And I don't know when the first one was, maybe 1983 or 84, 85 maybe, I don't know, one of those years. Mm-hmm. I started coming down every year while I was still in Kentucky. And I had known John. I had met him right when he came back from Asia when he was a monk. I had met him, I think, 1980. When I was staying at Insight Meditation Society. He came and stayed there for a while. And we got to be friends, and I started doing the retreats. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it was young, but my memory is that all the core buildings were here, I believe. What I remember from those early retreats was that I think the retreats I did around New Year's, some of them, maybe all of them, had 10 or 12 people. And they were very intimate. They didn't have, I don't know what the capacity was at that time, but these were small and wonderful intimate retreats where people would sit, I don't know how long they were, 5, 6, 7 days, and would sit in the hall in a very small group, and I loved it. Mm-hmm. And I remember staying at different places. I think there were cabins at that time up the road where I used to stay. And so I was coming almost every year for a number of years. And I think in 1988 I went out to California, mm-hmm. where I've more or less lived since then. And but I always had a warm spot in my heart for Southern Dharma, partly because I had a history growing up in Maryland, and then later my family moved to Virginia, mm-hmm. of spending time in the Southern Mountains. Mm-hmm. And in fact, my brother and I built a cabin in Highland County, Virginia, and being in California, I had this warm spot for the Southern Mountains. And mm-hmm. so I was very pleased when, 2000, 2001, I was invited to teach here. And I think maybe the first retreat may have been on engaged practice. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah. And I think we taught 2 retreats on that. And then I had a hiatus and then started coming back maybe 10, 11 years ago. I don't remember exactly. Mm-hmm. And I've been coming more or less annually. So, the mountains don't change too much. And, maybe the essence of being here, being in the mountains, being in a really beautiful, quiet, remote place with very kind, supportive staff and very dedicated practitioners I think that's been a constant since I started coming here in probably the middle 80s. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I know Southern Dharma, we keep it small, retreats at 27:30, but 10 or 11 when it was just getting started.
Yeah, I don't know, my guess is that was not capacity, but that was the number of people who came. Yeah, I mean, the Dharma wasn't as well known, and it was more located in maybe on the coast and so forth, and particularly maybe in the U.S. and the Northeast and out in California. So maybe it was an interest that grew over the years.
I think it's beautiful to hear some of this history and to just see how, as Southern Dharma, in the 40th year this year, to know and see a little more of that history and how things have shifted, and to be able to imagine and hope for the continuing of the Dharma, which is made possible by centers, teachers, and the students.
Yeah, may Southern Dharma thrive. It's a very special place, very important place, and there are a lot of visions for even making it more of a resource for really this area and beyond.
Wow, thank you for sharing time with me today and with all of the students. We
happy
appreciate
to be here, and I look forward to coming back many times.
We look forward to having you. Thank you.